welcome to the Optimizing Your Brilliance podcast, where we get to the source of what makes people brilliant and explore how to eradicate the barriers that stop you from shining. By shining, I mean being at your absolute best in both work and life. You'll hear from business and thought leaders who bear all and share their insider secrets, along with my episodes focused on optimizing your performance, productivity, success, and well-being. My name is Estelle Reed, founder of Be, executive coach, speaker, and best-selling author of Inner Brilliance, Outer Shine, 10 Antidotes to Imposter Syndrome, Workaholism, and Stress. So, if you're ready to take your work life to the next level, let's begin. Hello, how are you? Hope you're well. So there was an instant the other week whilst I was off on holiday that compelled me to record this for you because it was one of those life-changing moments, and it started to make me think about how often do we get a wake-up call, and also why is it sometimes we've got to go to the very edge before we go, hang on a minute, I need to make some changes. And it also reminded me of two things. One, when this occurred before in my life, which I'll tell you about in a moment. And then two, as a coach, how I could help you to have that kind of experience where you go to the edge and you think, actually, it's time to make some changes. So that's my intention. It's going to be like a mini, so I'll tell you a couple of stories, then it'll be a mini coaching session, a personal coaching session for you. And so when I get to the coaching bit, make sure you're not driving or operating equipment or machinery, because you'll need to reflect and focus in on some of the things that I'm asking you. You're an adult, do what you like. So, two life-changing moments. The first was my husband and I had not been married very long, a couple of years into our marriage. And I think, like any marriage, I must have been about 27, 28 by this stage. I was his second wife, still am his second wife. And there were some bumps in the road. We had to learn how to communicate with each other, but we'd had serious marital issues to the extent where we were thinking about separating. I can remember at the time we were living in Derbyshire, and I can remember, so it's pre-internet days, flicking through the paper, looking at properties, thinking, I really need to think about, are we going to separate? And we went off, we had marriage guidance counselling, which was amazing and really helped us to learn to communicate better with each other. So Mike was very much keep everything to himself, not really disclose what he's thinking and feeling, whereas I was one of those that would sweep it also under the carpet, but then have an explosion. And that just wasn't a way to communicate. So I think by this stage we'd come through our marriage guidance counselling, but the relationship wasn't where it was initially. It's that whole thing that trust takes time to build, but it can be gone in an instant. And so we were still at that trust building phase. And I think at that point we decided that we were still going to make a go of it, but we weren't fully on board with that, or I wasn't. And anyway, I'm there in Derby. My husband was looking at CDs back in the day when you used to go in a record shop, and the light in the showroom shone on his neck and I could see a lump. I said, hey, what's that on your neck? And he said, oh, nothing, I've had it for ages. And I said, that doesn't look right. Anyway, I booked him an appointment at the doctor's, and apparently the doctor goes pale when he explains what's going on. And long story short, they thought he had cancer, they thought it was life-threatening, and we'd got a holiday booked. We'd gone to see a consultant, and he said, look, I don't know what it is until I get in there and I operate. But what I would suggest is you cancel your holiday so that I can do that. So we were at home, we were reflecting, we were thinking about it. And anyway, we then got a follow-up call the next day, and he said, look, if it is cancer, you might as well just go and enjoy your holiday. So go and enjoy your holiday. So we went on holiday thinking, and it was just the most awful time. And it's for anyone that's suffered with health issues out there, and I've had cancer in the past. The worst part for me was just the waiting and the not knowing. And I certainly felt that as his partner. And I can remember like trying to be really strong for him and driving to work. At the time, I was head of HR for a law firm. And it was my only moment to myself. Driving to work, I'd have a really good cry to get it all out of my system and then put my professional hat back on. So off we go on this holiday. As I say, we're still navigating our marital issues. And again, I can remember on holiday, we'd gone to this amazing resort in Greece, and it was just the start of my nickname is five-star Estelle. I love luxury quality things. I think it's probably because in the past we couldn't afford those things growing up. Excuse me. And so we were at a point in our careers where we could afford beautiful hotels. And I was sat on this balcony again, really early in the morning, thinking, blimey, the things we've been rowing about are absolutely pointless. It really put things into perspective. He was asleep in this room and he was at risk of losing his life. Now, for that particular holiday, he spent a lot of time drinking not sambuca, what do you call it? Ouzo, falling off bar stools, trying to forget what we'd got to return to. And he had an operation. They removed a lipoma. It was like that. For those of you that are not watching this, you're just listening, it was 5 inches by 11, but it was non-cancerous. But we didn't know that until they removed it. But they said, look, you could risk you not being able to use your arm and all that kind of thing. Anyway, what that did, it did push us right to the very edge. And it was a wake-up call for this person is just so important to me, and let's get things back on track. And the rest, as they say, is history because we've been married 27 years. But I also had a similar incident the other Friday. And I'm wondering if you have ever had incidents like this as well, where it's your wake-up call to see things from a different perspective. And I'd love to know, message me. I'd love to know your experience as well, what impact it had, what changes you made. Or maybe you just need reminding of that experience of what's important so that you too can make changes now. So Thursday night, sat up in bed. My husband isn't on social media. I save funny reels from Instagram in a special file to share with him. We're both sat up in bed like that. I'm showing him the funny reels on my phone. And I have a reputation for when I cry with laughter, I get a laughter cough. It's really embarrassing if people don't know me. But for whatever reason, it makes me really cough. Anyway, so we're sat in bed, probably not the best thing to be doing before we're about to drift off to sleep. Have overstimulated ourselves because we're crying with laughter. And anyway, he soon nods off to sleep as he always does. I start drifting off to sleep, and then all of a sudden I felt like I couldn't breathe. And I sat upright and I had chest pain and I was quite scared. Anyway, I'm a woman of a certain age. I sleep with the bedroom window open, which helps me sleep. And so I go over to the bedroom. It's hilarious because I drop the blind but there's about that much at the bottom. There's a gap beneath the blind so that the air from the window can come in. Anyway, so I'm like this. So obviously, if you're watching, you can see what I'm doing, but I'm bending down, trying to breathe in the fresh air to try and I just felt like I couldn't get any air in my lungs. And every time I tried to drift off to sleep, I just had the same feeling like I couldn't get air in my lungs and like I couldn't breathe. Anyway, I'd had an instant like this. I can't remember exactly when. I want to say about 12 months ago. So we were just about to go off to Centre Parks with the family. So we're in woods in the middle of nowhere. And I thought, I better go and get myself checked out. Because when I looked on the symptoms, it said, this sounds like asthma. Anyway, and the other reason I thought it was asthma is that what the advice was to cold air makes it worse. So I thought, oh, flipping it. Anyway, I shut the window and lo and behold, I did drift off back to sleep. Anyway, I'd managed to get an appointment. It's to see a paramedic at our doctor's surgery. And I start telling her about what's happened. And this is where I wish that I couldn't read people like a book, but I could read her and I could see that she seemed a little bit panicked and she'd started to get blotchy on her neck. And she said, run that by me again. Tell me about your symptoms. And I said, well, I think it's just an asthma attack. I've had it before, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, from the point onwards, it's a little bit hazy. So if the wonderful paramedic that saw me is listening to this, and it's not entirely factually correct, I apologise. It was one of those, as I say, going right to the edge moments. And she said to me, I think you've either had a heart attack or you're having a heart attack, and I'm going to call an ambulance. And so in that moment, I was like, what? I thought I've got asthma. And I've done what all doctors, because I've trained doctors in the past, what they hate us doing, which is being Google doctor. So I apologised for trying to diagnose myself. Anyway, she said, look, I'm going to get you some aspirin to take now. I'm going to give you this spray under your tongue. And whilst also trying to, she said, because I said to her, I said, I'm just about to go on holiday. I said, it's my stepdaughter's 40th. I can't not go. And so I got all of, which sounds ridiculous, because that was the other bit of learning for me, which was all the stuff that goes through your head in those moments when you do go right to the edge. And I said, do I have to go? Are you sure I need to go? And she said to me, look, you only get one heart and it's not worth taking the risk. And the other thing was that my uncle, my aunt, my granddad, they've all had heart surgery. My dad discovered he had a dicky ticker before he died of cancer. So family history, not great also. Anyway, so I have the aspirin, I have the spray, I go and sit downstairs. Before I'd had any medication, before the lady had said those words to me, the only symptom I had was like a pressure in my chest. And other than that, I felt fine. Anyway, I'm sat in the chair and I think it was a paramedic. This is what I mean. When your brain goes into panic mode, not entirely clear of the facts, said, how are you feeling now? Do you feel nauseous? Do you feel dizzy? And I felt both those things. I got up to go to the loo and I had to hang on to the sink because I was that dizzy. I thought, what is going on? So then all of a sudden I'm thinking, maybe I am having a heart attack. Maybe that's what's happening. And then in that moment, that's when I was pushed right to the very edge. And I was like, it was like life flashed before me. And I was like, hang on a minute, this isn't my time. I'm supposed to live until I'm 93. In my rocking chair overlooking the lake. That's what I imagine. And So there was a real disconnect there. I was thinking, this can't be happening to me. This isn't right. The next thing that went through my mind was, so I'd already had, I can't possibly go and get my heart checked out because it's my stepdaughter's birthday weekend. I didn't want to cause an inconvenience. I didn't want to be a drama queen, to be honest. I felt really embarrassed about it. In my mind, I imagined going in, getting a checkup, coming out with an inhaler. Bish, bash, bosh, done. Anyway, the next thing that went through my mind was, oh God, if I am having a heart attack, am I going to have to take all my clothes off? What sort of underwear have I got on? Like when your mum used to tell you to wear your nice underwear. Let's just say I had faded white. Sorry, that's TMI, isn't it? But you, female listeners, you will get me, won't you, when I say that? I didn't have my best underwear on. And then I thought about, did I paint my toenails? Oh yeah, I've got painted toenails, not chipped nail varnish, which is absolutely ridiculous in that moment. Then my mind went to like my husband and my daughter, and all I could think about was protecting my daughter. I didn't want her to know what was going on. So both my husband and I were very careful about what we communicated to her. Turns out she's got like a sixth sense and she knew something was up anyway. And I know that I am overly protective of her, I always have been. But for me, it wasn't a burden that my child should have to experience or process. She didn't need to know I was waiting for an ambulance, going to hospital, and they were thinking I was having a heart attack. And my view was that she needed to know on a need to know basis. So if it was discovered that I was having a heart attack, that's fine. At that point, then obviously we would be clear about our communication. Anyway, so the ambulance arrives. This is also so funny. I I didn't want to make a fuss. I didn't want them coming in with a stretcher and there being a big hoo-ha. I was quite happy to, can I just go and walk outside? Can I just walk to the ambulance? And anyway, ambulance turns up. We get, by the way, on reflection, they probably didn't think it was that serious, as it took about 2 hours to get an ambulance. And then we don't have a local hospital here in Kendal that deals with, well, or an A&E. We have a hospital, we don't have A&E. We have to go over to Lancaster, the hospital I was born in. Anyway, I get into the ambulance. The paramedics say, do you want to lie down? I said, no, not really. I'm fine. Do I have to go? So again, I'm challenging, I'm in denial. That process that we go through, and it's the Kubler-Ross cycle. So first, when we receive information, first step is denial. I was definitely in denial. No, I don't, do I have to go? I don't want to go. Can't you just do some checks here? And again, it's reiterated, you only have one heart. And they said, no, we need to get you to hospital because we've got to do a special blood test where we can detect whether you've had a heart attack or not. But we do need to get you checked out. So anyway, I insisted on sitting up. So I've got all these things stuck all over me, being monitored, it's beeping away. At this point, my heart is beating really fast and I can see it, but I know it's because I'm anxious. I don't want to go. But then eventually everything settles down, my heart rate. But in that moment, I really had to, I used a technique called the peripheral vision drill, which is like a self-hypnosis process. So this is when my NLP, neuro-linguistic programming training comes in, and I'm going to be sharing an NLP technique with you in a moment. And basically what you do, so if you ever feel really anxious and you want to calm your nervous system down really quickly, you look a point above your eye line. So you want to look upwards at a single point of focus. So for me, this was a spot in the ambulance. So you look up, and the benefit is, so our eyes move in all sorts of different directions. And when we are accessing all those different directions, what we're doing is we're accessing different types of thought. So when we're looking up, that's our visual cortex. When we're looking across at ear level, that's our auditory area of our brain. So we are tuning into sounds, so pictures up there, sounds across at ear level. And then when we look down, we're either accessing our inner dialogue, so how we're talking to ourselves, or our feelings. Now, in that moment, because my fight or flight had been triggered, and this is why the technique works, I couldn't access any sensible inner dialogue. Or I could a little bit, like, you'll be okay, it's okay, you feel fine. But that just wasn't cutting it in that moment because I just felt so anxious. And also, we don't want to feel those feelings in that moment either. So we can break out of that thought process by accessing the visual cortex. So it's one of the reasons that we look on a single point of focus, but above eye level. Anyway, so I'm looking up in the ambulance, and what you do is you focus on a point and then you gradually broaden your peripheral vision. So what I'm doing with my hands, if you're listening, so you focus on the point, and then my hands are at the side of my head. So I'm then still focusing on that point above eye level, but I'm able to see my hands at either side of my head. So I can see that in my peripheral vision. Then you take your peripheral vision out further still. So I've broadened my hands out. I'm still focusing on that point, but I can still see my hands at either side of my head. And then we broaden it out further still, so I can still see my hands in my peripheral vision. They're probably about a foot, I don't know, I'm not very good at measurements, about a foot away either side from my head, but I can still see my hands. And in that moment, what you'll find is that everything quietens inside. And so once I've done that, as I say, all my vitals relaxed, they calmed down. That wasn't until I arrived at the hospital again. I didn't really like that in A&E. But again, just repeated and went through the same process. Long story short, everything was fine. I hadn't had a heart attack. When I saw the consultant, she said, I think you have an overactive immune system. And I said, funny you should say that. I have ME. So I have an exaggerated response even when I get a cold. So my body goes into overdrive. And so all that had happened, all that had happened is I'd got a cold and I'd laughed too much. So I'd irritated this area here, which had produced asthma-like symptoms. So off I pop and I get my inhaler. And we go to Centre Parks. And do you know what? I didn't know what to expect with Centre Parks. I went many years ago. We took our stepson when he was about 14. And it certainly isn't, it's very different today. There's a lot more activities for kids, for sure. We only did things like archery and swimming when we went the first time. But it's a little bit like, I would describe it as a theme park in the woods. It can be chaotic. It was half term. And as an introvert, I don't like chaos. I prefer tranquility and calm. But do you know what? We got that. I just love being in the woods. A hut in the woods, you could describe it as. Just being with nature, seeing the red squirrels. What I loved the most was just being with my family and having that magical family time. And I completely switched off from work. It was fabulous. I don't think there's anything better than spending time with little children to absolutely make you focus and be in the moment. That was, as I say, that was my wake-up call for the rest of the holiday, actually. I was just like, oh my God, this is what it's like to be really peaceful and relaxed. So that was what came out of that experience, to be totally cut off from social media. I do have a very tiny, small personal Instagram account, which is just for family and close friends, where I will share videos of what's been going on. But for me, that's just fun. It's not work. So other than that, it was just like, oh my God, this is just so peaceful. So it reminded me of how to get back to peace in this really busy world that we find ourselves in. So that was the learning. Now, what I'm going to start with is my intention is to enable that same kind of experience for you, but without having like a traumatic experience. So this is, so I learned this technique when I trained as a coach. It's probably about 24 years ago, 25 years ago, and they called it know-how. The idea is that we assess our lives, where are we at right now? And then we go into the past, but we also go into the future. And we make some observations about how far we've come, but also maybe what are the things that we need to change in our life right now in order to make the next 5 years fabulous or even better than they are right now. So it's a really good opportunity, and also to think about, because I don't know when I'm going to publish this episode. I am recording it on, remember, the 5th of November. But it's a really good opportunity for you to use this exercise, maybe to think about what you want in 2026. So yeah, that's my intention, to give you some you time to reflect, to think about what you want from your future. So a really good way of doing this is to allocate 3 chairs. So this chair that I'm in right now, this would represent this moment as I am right now. So wherever you're sat or maybe stood, so if you're standing up, you could use 3 different, and it's important to do this because it helps you to break state. So that's an NLP, neuro-linguistic programming term. So we break out of one state and we move into another. So if you stood up, you could literally mark out 3 points on the floor. But wherever you are right now, this represents the present. So if you were to assess yourself today, right now, and you were to think about, I'm going to give you some categories to think about, and then it would be really useful for you to score each of those categories. So 10 is perfect, no change required here. 0 is I've got some work to do. So as we go through each one of those categories and you reflect on that, give each category a score and trust the first number that pops in your head. So the first category is health. So that's your physical health and your mental health. So health and well-being. So if you were to score that on a scale of 1 to 10, what's the first number that pops in your head? 10 is amazing. 0 is we've got some work to do. So I'm going to give you a moment now to reflect on that. And as you think about that score now, what makes it that score? So take, for example, if you are in your optimal health state and it is a 10 out of 10, what are all the great things that you are doing now? Is it the food you're eating? Is it the exercise you're taking? Is it your mental health regime? So maybe you're meditating, journaling, you're in coaching or any of those things. What are all the contributing factors that are making that score? Equally, if say it's a 6 out of 10, what's the 4 points that are missing? So why isn't it a 10 out of 10? What's that gap? Next, we're going to move to, so we've done health, we're now going to move to wealth. So as you think about your wealth right now on a scale of 1 to 10, what number would you put on it? And trust the first number that pops in your head. And then as you think about that now, what is it that makes it that score? So effectively, what's working? What's not working? It's funny, I'm sat here thinking, so in a coaching session, I will literally sit and pause and allow the coachee to to think, basically, because if I'm jabbering on, you can't think. So there are going to be some uncomfortable pauses. Next category. What about your overall happiness? Now, the thing that studies show is associated with happiness is often our relationships. So we'll call it happiness and relationships. So score that out of 10. And as you think about that score, what's making it that score? So what is it that's working, but also what is it that's not working when it comes to your happiness and relationships? Next, we're going to focus on home, your home. Where do you reside right now? And as you think about that now, what number would you give on that? What number would you give for that? And then as you think about that score now, what makes it that score? So what's working? What's not working? And then finally, we're going to focus on career. So as you think about your career or your business, what you do for a living. So as you think about that now, what number would you put on that out of 10? And then as you think about that score, what's working and what's not working? So you've done your initial assessment of right now. So this is this year. What we're going to do now, so if you are physically in a room, you would go and sit in another chair. So I've just moved my chair. I'm gonna have to move it back because I need to be near my microphone. So what I would recommend you do is you physically pick up your chair and you put it in a different location. Now, even if you want some Brucey bonus points, so we all have a timeline, and our timeline is the way in which we organise our present, our past, and our future. So again, this is a bit of NLP for you. So the Brucey bonus point is, so you get an extra point if you instinctively know where your past is. So for me, my past is there, which is why instinctively I move my chair to there. So those of you that are listening, I have moved to the left and I'm gesturing on my left. So that's in front of me as well. So that is my past. And then my future is in that direction, which is to my right. I appreciate this is going to be back to front if you're watching it, but it doesn't matter whichever way. So as you think about your past now, what springs to mind? So for some, it can be behind them. And in which case, I would suggest you move your chair to behind you. For some people, the past might be off in a diagonal direction. Whatever you get will be absolutely right for you. Just trust. So this is an exercise in trusting your instincts as well. So go and place the chair, whatever direction is right for you. Go and sit in that chair. And then what we're going to do is we're going to reflect on your past. So 5 years ago. So as you go and sit in that chair now. So this is 5 years ago. So this is November, 5th of November, 2020. And you know, spooky, what was happening 5 years ago today? We were just starting our second lockdown. So it is a moment in time, isn't it? I remember that. I remember thinking, blimey, O'Reilly, how long is this going to last? We'd got used to opening up, hadn't we, in the summer? We had a little holiday to Devon with my family, and it was just really magical to experience that. And you know, to be released, to be outside, to be mixing with public, to be able to go to restaurants, all that kind of thing. So then to experience another lockdown, that was tough, wasn't it, folks? The second lockdown. Although we knew it wasn't as scary, we knew what to expect. We'd already developed lockdown skills, so it wasn't all bad. But let's go back. You sat in that chair now. It is 2020, November, or whatever month you're listening to this. So you are 5 years ago. And so as you think about you 5 years ago, how old were you? So I'm going to have to do the maths. I was 47 5 years ago. And as you and think about if you've got family, think about how old your family members were 5 years ago and what that was like. So my daughter will have been 12, a teenager. And when I think about her now being 17, it's like, blimey O'Reilly, where has that time gone? So let's stay focused on the past in 2020, 5 years ago. And as you think about 5 years ago now, reflect and think about your health and well-being. So your physical health and your mental health 5 years ago. What was that like? I realise now I was on the cusp of perimenopause. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't really feel like myself. All of a sudden, my vision started failing. I remember 5 years ago during lockdown, looking in the mirror and going, oh, I've got a hair on my face. What's that? And I couldn't brush it off. Do you know why I couldn't brush it off? It was a wrinkle and I couldn't see it. Anyway, so 5 years ago, how was your health? Score it out of 10. 10 is the optimum, the best it could be. So your physical health, your mental health. What number pops into your head 5 years ago? So you are 5 years ago now, and you were thinking about your physical and mental health. And then what made it that score? So if you were to think about that now, 5 years ago, what made it? What was working? What wasn't working? So this is a really good opportunity. Sometimes we lose sight of, first of all, good habits. So sometimes I find for me, when I break a good habit, when I go on holiday or there's an interruption in my routine. And so I have to remember to reinstate the good habit. So 5 years ago for you, what were your good habits? What was really working? So I remember 5 years ago, people were talking about, oh, I've no commute home because we were all locked in and working, unless you were a key worker like my husband. We didn't have that commute home, did we? It was pretty full on, wasn't it? For those of you that were home educating as well. Oh, do you remember that? And I can remember feeling completely overwhelmed. And all of my business was face to face. And so business fell off a cliff. It was really scary. I can remember going to my husband going, I can't afford to pay my portion of the mortgage this month. And thankfully he plugged that gap. But I'm a really responsible person. We always share the bills. And I really did not like that. So that had an impact on my mental health 5 years ago. But also, if we focus on what were the good things that came out of that. So for me, all my business is now online. It's great. Enabled me to relocate to the Lake District. I switched off at one end, switched on at the other. So there was some good that came out of that as well, wasn't there, 5 years ago? But also, it's interesting when we notice that perspective from 5 years ago and all the things that you have done and achieved, which have got you to the point right now. Staying focused 5 years ago, sat in that chair over there. Now reflect on your wealth 5 years ago. What was that like? Put a number on it and then identify what made it that score. So what were the good habits? What were the not so good habits? So I know 5 years ago, what we were working towards was paying our mortgage off because we'd got our plan to relocate to the Lake District. It seemed, well, when I put my spreadsheet together and I showed it to my husband and I said, look, these are the payments we're going to have to make in order to be able to pay our mortgage off by, I think it was May 2022. And he said, that's impossible. So, because sometimes we were both making double, but sometimes treble the payments, which meant we had to adjust our spending in order to get to that point. We did achieve it. We achieved it actually to the very month. It was spooky, really. But the point is, we have to set goals, don't we? Which is why we're doing this exercise. So, next topic. 5 years ago, let's assess your happiness and relationships. And what were they like 5 years ago? 2020, November 2020, it was quite a tense environment at home. Going back to school educating, the relationships we had were very limited, weren't they? We certainly used Zoom for a lot of those relationships. Do you remember the quizzes we did? We used to go out on the front door and bang the pots. Remember, that was a little moment of, oh, I get to see my neighbours and we get to appreciate those key workers and all that kind of thing. I can remember another highlight for us was walking to Staunton Herald. Remember, we were limited on our walks. And we only allowed to walk so far, I can't remember. But I can remember we used to walk to Staunton Herald. I love Staunton Herald. I miss Staunton Herald, actually. That's one of the things I miss, having relocated to the Lake District. It was definitely my happy place when I lived in the East Mids. And we used to go to this coffee shop. It was like a deli. And so we'd buy some fruit and veg and we'd have a chat at a distance with the shop owner. He was like a lifesaver, that guy. And then we'd enjoy our walk back. And that was our time outside. But yeah, happiness probably impacted 5 years ago. Our relationships impacted. For some people, I've heard people say, oh, actually, I absolutely loved lockdown. I loved that opportunity to be with my kids all the time or my partner all the time, or I loved that, just that time to not have to interact socially. But then equally, I think about some of the poor souls. So if you lived alone, how hideous must that have been for folk to be isolated all the time? I never forget those images of people, I think, was it Italy that locked down first, and people were, for me, it felt trapped in their flats. And I remember people leaning out the balconies and they weren't even allowed to go out. I remember that. Oh gosh, it was hideous. Yeah, so relationships and happiness 5 years ago. And then think about your home 5 years ago. What was that like? Where were you living 5 years ago? And what was it like? What number would you put on it? What did you appreciate about your home 5 years ago? But also, what would you have improved? For example, 5 years ago, I loved our house. I really did love our house. And the weak spot was the noise at the back of us. We had the M42 behind us, and it was particularly noisy during the winter. So during lockdown, do you know what was weird? No noise. But what I really appreciate about where we live now, even though we've got a little country road at the back of us, but hardly anybody uses it. It's so peaceful. So if I was to compare, contrast, that'd be one of the differences. So what is that for you? So home life, home 5 years ago, score, what was working, what wasn't working. Next, we're going to move on to your career, your business, what you do for a living. So what score would you give that out of 10? 10 is the optimal score. 0 is we've got some work to do. So back in 2020, what was that like? How were you impacted by the pandemic? Maybe you were furloughed or something like that. I remember my mate sending me pictures of drinking Prosecco because she'd been furloughed. Drinking Prosecco in the garden. And I can remember, I don't often experience jealousy. I'm not a jealous person because my view is if I want something, I'll go for it myself. There's no need to be jealous. But the other thing as well is that I really love when people are successful, and I really respect it, admire it, and I love it when people are self-made and they deserve everything they've got. This was an unusual feeling. I felt jealous that some of my friends were able to sit in the back gardens and, as I say, drink Prosecco, probably not in the second lockdown during winter. And I was having to work my arse off to keep my business surviving. I had to adapt, I had to change. I remember trying to use Zoom. It seemed like a flipping using a flight deck. I felt like a pilot. I had no clue what I was doing. I was trying to generate business. I started my podcast back in the pandemic. In fact, if you go back to one, I think it's our first episode, absolutely hilarious. We've both got lockdown hair because I did my first interview with my husband. Bless him, he's got a really big helmet hair, and my hair is terrible as well. But that was one of every man and the dog, didn't they, set up a podcast during lockdown? And so if I was to go back 5 years, that's one of my regrets. If I think about where my podcast could be now, if I continued that, who knows? But I gave it up. So as you think about your career 5 years ago, what was going on? Score it. What was working? What wasn't working? So we're now going to go to chair three. Chair three is 5 years' time. So remember, you get a Brucey bonus for physically moving your chair to where. So do you remember I said my future is to my right? So that's naturally where my mind goes when I think about my future. So if I was to think about where my future is in 5 years' time, I'm pointing, you can't see it's off camera, but I'm pointing again, probably about a foot away from me, but to my right. So instead, for you, your future might be in front of you, but just trust wherever that is. So go and put your chair wherever your future is, or go and physically move yourself to your future. And we're going to repeat the exercise, but this time we are 5 years into your future. So as you think about that time, my goodness me, it's going to be 2030, folks. This is where you really start to feel old. I will be 57. My husband, he's going to be 70. That's a real reality check for me. So think about the year 2030 and think about how old your loved ones are going to be. So it might be parents, it might be children, it might be your partner like me. Again, when I think, gosh, in 5 years' time, probably my daughter will have left home, and that kind of breaks my heart. But although I know that's part of our role, isn't it, as parents? So, yeah, 5 years' time, how old will you be? How old will your family be? So, I'll give you a moment to reflect on that now as you're sat there in 2030. As you sit there in 2030, this is a moment to reflect on your life. Like I spoke about being in the surgery, and I was thinking about random things like, this isn't the end of my life. I'm going to live till I'm 93. Have I painted my toenails? What we're going to tell our daughter, all that type of stuff. So this is the moment where you fast forward to the future and you sit in 2030 and you reflect and think about, what do you want from 2030 for 5 years' time? So let's just think for a moment. Let's think about your health, so your physical and your mental well-being. So if you reflect and look also back at your present, so where you are right now today. So if you were to continue doing what you are doing in relation to your physical and mental well-being, is that sustainable in 2030? I don't mind admitting I've put weight on again. I've always been a bit of a yo-yoer. So I was much slimmer in 5 years ago. I was probably about a stone lighter. And if I continue if I was to get another stone heavier in 5 years' time, I would not like that. I think about how much more difficult it would be to climb up Kendall Fell. I'd have to get, the other thing is, I'm a clothes hoarder. I've got clothes from donkeys years ago. I won't be able to wear any of those clothes because I won't be able to fit into them. And then there's the impact it would have on my joints. So the impact on my joints, my inability to climb up Kendall Fell, living here, you can't go anywhere without climbing a hill. We live at the top of a hill, in fact. So I wouldn't be able to tolerate that in 5 years' time. And therefore, I need to make some changes again to how much food I'm consuming. And actually, what I'm doing, I was inspired by my mate Bobby. He came to stay for the weekend, and he is just like the master of discipline. If he wants to lose a bit of weight, he just simply uses a calorie counting app. And yeah, he's already lost about 1.5 stone in a bat of an eyelid. So inspired by my mate Bobby, if you're listening, he won't be listening. Yeah, that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm raising awareness of what I'm putting in my gob because in another 5 years' time, I can't afford to be where I'm at right now. So, as you think about your health, physical and mental health, what's the aspiration? Where would you like to be at in 5 years' time? What would make it a 10 out of 10? Next, we're going to move to, and feel free, by the way, I should have given you this tip at the start if I thought about it. Press pause. Whenever I'm asking you these questions, just press pause and reflect and then press play again. So it's like an actual coaching session. That was my intention. So next heading, wealth. So what would you like your wealth to be like in 2030, in 5 years' time? So what would you like to be different? What would you like to maintain? So what is, again, the aspiration when it comes to that? And what number would you put on it? Next, let's focus on happiness and relationships. So as you think about 2030, and again, this can be a real stark reminder, one of those, oh, life-changing moments. It's a wake up to change. So on my private social media account, I shared my 40th birthday video. And in that video, so we had a fantastic party up here, funnily enough, in the lakes, at the venue where we got married. And the idea was that we recreated our wedding day because we had such an amazing time. We love having family around us, and that's how I chose to celebrate. Because my husband said, "Do you want to go off and have a fancy holiday, or should we have a party?" So we had a party. Anyway, when I think about that time, or when I look at that video, my grandson is tiny. My daughter is tiny. They are, I think they're about 4. Yeah, I think they're about 4. And they're there dancing along, little tiny human beings. But also, it's the people that are no longer in my life. My granddad, nicknamed 90 Boy, that was my daughter's nickname for him. So he's passed. My nana, she passed last year. I'm so lucky, aren't I? 52 and only just lost my grandparents. My dad, he died young. He was 68, I think, when he died. Who else have we lost? I mean, lost my father-in-law. So it's all of those people that were there. That don't we take relationships and people for granted sometimes because they're always there. So it's thinking about 5 years' time, who is in my life? Who maybe could I appreciate more now that maybe in 5 years' time, who knows? Gosh, who knows what's ahead for us? Huh? So thinking about that, what changes might you make? What's the aspiration in relation to happiness and relationships? And do you know what? Sometimes it can be ending a relationship. I remember again, when I trained as a coach, one of the things that our trainers said to us is sometimes when we are transforming ourselves, it's important to do a bit of a check on what the relationships in our life that are helpful and aligned with our values, and what are the relationships in our life that actually are doing damage or eating away at our happiness. And I am a really loyal friend, so I'm in for the long term. I don't have masses of friends. I have a really close group of 5 friends, but equally, we can have associates, can't we? Business associates. We can have friends that we don't see so often, or friends that are not in our inner circle. But sometimes it requires, and it's very painful for me to cut someone off, and it takes me ages to do it. But there are times when that's required because that relationship is uncomfortable or makes you unhappy, or someone is taking advantage. And that's often my mistake. One of my best mates, Auntie Ju, if you're listening, that's you. She says, yeah, you have a habit of taking in waifs and strays, and you always see the best in people. The slight downside is that being an empath, sometimes that can be taken advantage of. But as I've got older, I really have learned life is precious, life is short, and sometimes we do have to disconnect from some relationships, and that's okay. And those relationships that I have disconnected from, it was really painful at the time, as I say, but I am so glad that I did that because it improved my happiness by letting those relationships go. So let's move on to the next category, and that's home. So as you think about your home now, sorry, not now, in the future, 5 years' time, what would you like to be different, the same? What's working? What's not working? What's the aspiration there? As our aspiration for a long time was to relocate to the Lake District, and we had a pretty painful relocation, I'll be honest. It was tough. But it was only tough because we spent a lot of time finding our ideal home. We spent a lot of time fanning around looking at DIY properties because we couldn't. It was a bit like we would have been a Phil and Kirsty nightmare, as in it was an occasion, but something had to give. And so we thought what had to give was we'll buy a doer-upper, but to be honest, that wasn't it. We're not DIYers at all. That was total misalignment. But again, once we realigned with our values, what was important, so a new build, privacy, having enough space, we found our ideal home. It became available in 4.5 weeks from sale to purchase. It was really, again, one of those spooky moments. So yes, sometimes good can come from that pain, can't it? So as you think about your home, 5 years' time, what would you like that to be like? And then finally, we'll move to career, your occupation, your business, whatever that may be. So as you think about that in 5 years' time, what's the aspiration there? And one of the things that has unsettled me a little bit recently is that a lot of my business associates, friends, colleagues, they're all thinking about retirement. And that scares me a bit, as in, I love what I do and I can't imagine retiring. But it's also a reminder that I'm not getting any younger. So, yeah, but it's been seeing people either retire or announce retirement or tell me about the scheduled retirement. That has been another one of those wake up moments. Okay, so if I'm going to stick around, if I'm always going to do a little something in my business, what would that look like? What would that be like? Like 5 years' time, oh my goodness, we talk about AI, the saying 3 months' time is that's the speed of change that we're dealing with. Maybe, and I was saying this to my husband, So I suspect I will probably work full time for another 15 years, but I'll always do something. And, but I was saying to my husband the other day, I said, I wonder what the coaching landscape will look like in 15 years' time. So I'll be honest, I have downloaded an AI coach just to because I'm curious, but also you've got to keep an eye on the competition, haven't you? You've got to move, adapt, do or die, evolve or die. And actually, there's been some elements which have been really good. So when you run your own business, or if you're a leader and you're top of the tree and it's difficult to open up and think that's how us coaches make a living. We are the eyes, the ears, the confidant for leaders. But same applies if you're a solopreneur, in that for me, I just want someone to tell me straight. I want someone to say, do you know what? That idea is crap. Or do you know what? You're sounding really confused over that. And that's what my AI coach has been. So it's not proper coaching, actually, it's mentoring. So the definition of coaching is it's pure elicitation. It's just as so I have been coaching you through this activity by asking you questions. I've not been telling you to think things, as in 5 years' time, you will think and feel this. That would be me giving you my input. So often coaching and mentoring gets mixed up. So mentoring is very much about sharing your advice, your opinion, your expertise. So it's putting input in, and it requires more judgment because you are making a decision for the other person. You're saying, hey, I would do this. So every man and the dog can mentor, because even when we're down the pub and our mate says, I'm struggling with this, how quick are we to give our advice? Whereas coaching, the nuance is different in that we suspend judgment, we suspend our ego, we ask open questions. So we get the coachee to think for themselves, because do you know what? They are the best own resource. And they're far more resourceful than they realize. And often they've got the answers inside. All they need is time and space to reflect, to access their unconscious mind. And so when it comes to AI, that's where I don't feel threatened, because it can't provide that service yet. The other area where I don't feel threatened by AI is when it comes to things like cheating change. So using techniques like NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and also something called havening, which I use with 90% of my executives, which in order to use a technique like that, you need to be able to calibrate what's going on for the client. So what I mean by that, seeing, do you remember me talking about the paramedic earlier? I calibrated, she was anxious, she was blotchy up her neck. AI can't do that for us yet, can it? I saw a panorama documentary and how Elon Musk is developing these robots. Who knows, 15 years' time. But we need to think about it, don't we? That's the point. We have to think about, and this is something I do regularly with businesses. We contemplate the future. We think about our vision. Where do we want to take our business? But also the classic SWOT analysis. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are our threats? So AI could be a threat, or you could use it to your advantage. And what are those opportunities? So how do we turn those threats into opportunities? And the same applies in our career. So if right now, when you think about your career or your business, and you feel a little bit threatened by whatever is on the horizon, reflect and think about how you can get ahead of that and how you might like things to be, as I say, in 5 years' time. Think about your strengths, think about the weaknesses. And it's not about correcting those weaknesses. We all have weaknesses, and it is okay. But it is about plugging those gaps, isn't it? Particularly if you're a leader in a team, if you're weak on organisation, do you know what? Get someone in your team who's great at organisation, get them to do that element of your role. So think about your weaknesses, think about the threats. So what is on the horizon from a legislative point of view? Think about the workforce that's coming through. Some businesses are at risk because they're not adapting to the needs of the generations that are coming through. Different things are important to them. They want to work for organisations with purpose, with strong values, and they're open to changing careers. So organisations need to be ready for that, don't they? So that could be another threat. But then it's thinking about, what are those opportunities? What could I do to turn that into an opportunity? So for me, as I say, I don't feel threatened with the sort of coaching work that I do. And I think it's a real opportunity to niche as a coach. You can't buy what I deliver on an app. There you go. That was a mini sales pitch, wasn't it? Sorry about that. But yeah, so, right, we've reflected on 2030, 5 years' time, and it's time to move back to now. So we're going to move back to present day and to sit back in that chair. So move your chair back to present day or walk back to that spot and reflect and think about, okay, what was good from my past, which I've forgotten about? What do you deserve to give yourself a pat on the back for? Look how far you've come. And also, what are some of those good habits that you need to bring into now from your past that you used to do, which you've forgotten about? And then as you think about your future and you think about your future goals and aspirations in 5 years' time, what are the changes that you need to make right now in order to work towards that vision or those goals in the future? So that is the end of the exercise. Gordon Bennett knows how long I've been recording, but I wanted to do it authentically, the way in which I would work ordinarily with clients as well. I wanted it to be relaxed. Apologies if you have been standing listening to this. I thought, oh my goodness, if you have been stood up listening to me telling all the stories, you might needed to have sat down. Anyway, sending you warm wishes. I hope that's been useful. Slight plug for my services. If you do want to come and work with me as an executive coach, or you want me to run a team day for you, let me know. I have two amazing, I'm going to say that, aren't I? Two great programs. One is the Resilient Leader Shine, which uses those techniques to release limitations from right now, which are often connected in your past and your childhood. And we clear up all of those up magically using Havening, so we can set you off for an amazing future. And then I've also got the Optimized Leader program, which is a 12-month program, which is all about this stuff. Thinking about what you want from your future in your business. I run it typically for leadership teams. It could be new or developing leaders, or leaders that are expected to take things to the next level. The program is called Next Level. And we do something called the identity pyramid. So we look at what's got you to the position that you're in right now. So what are your values, your beliefs, your habits, your behaviors? And then we think about, actually, where do you want to head instead? We establish a team vision. It's fabulous for collaboration, bringing different departments together, collaborating on one future point. We look at mission, we can look at values, and then we say, okay, what do we need to change in order to get and head towards that vision or that goal, that ambition? What are the changes we need to make? And then we construct a plan, but then we also work on the leaders as well. So we look at what are their internal blocks, what are the habits, what are the behaviors. I was with the leadership team yesterday, and they are really stepping up. Oh my goodness me, they're amazing. They're going to be taking over this business, but because they've stepped up, they were starting to feel a bit overwhelmed. So one of the mastermind sessions focused on, how do we reduce that overwhelm? how do we optimize how we spend our time? So we did a little time management masterclass yesterday. So we have masterclasses, we have content modules, we look at what are the limiting beliefs we need to let go of, which are going to get in way of us achieving our vision, but also how do we manage our emotional state? So how do we optimize our state of mind as well? So we use havening, which is one of those cheat techniques. I teach the leaders how to use it. We also use EFT. That's the tapping technique, which helps leaders manage their state of mind. And then we focus on how we rise to the next level. So we look at our self-sabotage patterns. So, for example, I self-sabotage with this flipping podcast. If I had just kept that momentum going, I dread to think where my podcast could be now, as opposed to I'm having to build it back up. So little shout out, can you like, subscribe, share, help this podcast grow so I can keep going? Really appreciate that. And to be honest, it's subscribers, or I don't know, I'm trying to think the terminology on. So it'd be subscribe on YouTube if you're watching. Please do that. That would be greatly appreciated. And then I think you have to subscribe or follow on Apple or whatever, wherever it is you listen to the podcast. So thank you so much for listening, and yeah, wishing you all the best. You know where I am. If you want to book a free discovery call, just go to estellereed.com and you can book it there. Or if you're watching, there's the QR code. Just scan that and you can book a code. All right. Take care. Bye. If you'd like to be notified when the next episode drops, remember to subscribe. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone who might benefit. Finally, if any of these topics have sparked your interest and you'd like to work with me, you can apply for a free discovery call at estellereed.com. Let's see if we're a good fit. You'll also find plenty of free resources there. I'm Estelle Reed, executive coach, speaker, and best-selling author, and this has been the Optimizing Your Brilliance podcast. Thanks for listening. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered professional advice. Please consult with a qualified professional for any specific advice related to your situation.